The opinions within the content of Channel 12 TV network are solely of our guest and do not reflect the views and beliefs of its hosts or affiliates. Those under 18, we ask that you enter the Channel 12 TV network with an adult.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous height, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rockets that glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Republican Town Hall Meeting Channel on Channel 12 TV Network. I'm your host, James Frere. My guest tonight is Michelle Peterson. Wow, how did she do that? Michelle Peterson has a very impelling story. It actually happened to her and her son. It's about grooming children in schools. Other topics that would be touched on is child exploitation, child trafficking. It's going to upset many people when you hear this, and sometimes it will make your toes curl. It's very sad what happened and what she had to do to get it corrected. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring Michelle on the stage here. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back again on this time. And so anyway, I gave a little bit of an intro about what happened to you, and I'll let you go ahead and run with it.
All right, sounds good. Just my camera a little bit. So I live in Morris. My name is Michelle Peterson, and my son Andrew was groomed by a male teacher back in 2010 here in Morris, Illinois. And the teacher at the time was 34, my son was 15. And for people who don't know, grooming is normal in some cases, right? So you groom your kids to be good, moral people. You groom someone to be a CEO of a company. And what this is unlawful grooming. So it's whereby somebody tries to gain the trust of another person or the community or the family to be able to do something nefarious to that child. And typically they're wanting to have sex with that child. So that's what happened with our case. So I am going to actually share the screen here and just play a little video to give you some background on our story.
Great. Still not presenting yet.
Yeah, hold on. Just got to
Okay,
get
there
there.
he is.
There we go.
Okay.
Bump that back up. Okay.
NBC5 investigates. Imagine discovering that your teenager has been receiving thousands of text messages from a teacher, many sexually explicit, dozens in the middle of the night. You might believe your child would tell you if this happened, but as NBC5's Phil Rogers discovered, that's not always the case.
The story unfolded here in Morris, southwest of Chicago, as middle America as it comes.
He wanted to make a sex video, put it straight out there.
Andrew Kozik says he had begun texting Stefan Belegno, a teacher here at Morris High School, because he was having trouble on the baseball team. But before long, he says Belegno was offering him money for oral sex.
It started off at $500 and then $1,000 and then $1,500.
But Andrew never told anyone, and no one knew until his mother heard him talking to Belegno on the phone.
He has no business calling you at 11 o'clock at night. That's completely inappropriate.
When she learned the two had been communicating by text message, Andrew's mother went to her computer and logged into the family's account. She found thousands of messages.
I was just sick because I knew in my heart, I'm like, this isn't just regular text messaging.
The family went to police, who searched Andrew's phone and found nearly 6,000 messages between the two. But only about a tenth of those could be recovered. And indeed, they are troubling. We can't read some of the more graphic messages, but among the more benign, the teacher writes, "When does the kissing begin?" "Icky," the student says. "How about if we just go at it and not video it?" the teacher declares. And on another occasion, "When you're 18, we can give each other everything."
Sometimes males to bond with males are crude.
Raymond Wigel is Belegno's lawyer. He insists the teacher was only trying to help Andrew through a bullying incident on the baseball team.
You say that these text messages do not indicate criminal activity. They certainly indicate stupidity for a teacher to be sending these messages.
Absolutely.
Wigel says he and his client concede bad judgment, but they point to the thousands of other texts no one read, as well as huge gaps in the transcripts.
There's a stupid intent, but there was not an evil intent to have sex with this young man.
I don't care what context you put it in. When you offer somebody money for sex, that's solicitation.
So why didn't Andrew tell someone? Records show at one point he even told a DCFS investigator the teacher's messages had not crossed the line.
Why'd you tell him?
I didn't want him to lose his job. I didn't want him to get in trouble.
Belegno was found guilty of indecent solicitation of a minor and unlawful grooming. He is to be sentenced next month.
I want him to have to register as a sex offender. The jail time would just be icing on the cake.
Michelle Peterson says she and her son wanted to talk to us to stress the importance of reporting incidents like this. 18 of these texts were after midnight, 15 after 3 a.m. The Grundy County State's attorney says he believes it's a cautionary tale about giving children digital technology this Christmas without firm guidelines on how it will be used.
Wow. So that's a wake-up call for everyone. I'm going to let you, I'm going to bring Michelle back on stage here in a second. But I want Michelle to tell you how big of a town Morris is. I've been past it, been through it. It's not a small town. It's not a big town. And that it can affect any type of community. And go ahead, Michelle.
Right. Yeah, we have about 100,000, I think, here. But it's a farming community. You know, you don't ever think this is going to happen to you. I mean, we're just normal everyday people. And this is one of the worst things it's the worst thing that's happened in our lives. So, and again, this was back in 2010. So that video was in 2013. My son at the time in that video was 19. And that was right after we went to court, but he hadn't been sentenced yet. And so he was, the teacher at the time was also working as a firefighter in a town nearby here as well, volunteer. So he had his tendrils out in the community for sure. But what happened is I overheard a conversation in October of 2010, and we had come home late from a funeral. I knocked on my son's door about 10:30, and he was sleeping. So I closed the door, kind of went about my business, and was getting ready for work the next day. And about a half hour or so later, I overheard him talking. He was loud, and he sounded pretty annoyed. And he said, "I don't know how often do you want me to call you? You know that I'm busy. I'm working 2 jobs, and I'm taking a class in college." And he was taking a class at the local college here. And then I heard him say, I'll meet you in your classroom tomorrow, pick up those paintballs. And again, like the video said, my heart just sunk, and I opened the door and I said, who are you talking to? And he told me, and I said, why is he calling you at 11 o'clock at night? I'm like, that's completely inappropriate. And he said he was driving home from watching Sunday Night Football and was getting tired. And I said, again, why is he calling you? So you need to hang up the phone. So he hung up the phone, and I immediately went downstairs and looked up the phone number that he was talking to and went to the text messages and found thousands of messages back until May. So from May until October of 2010, these messages went on. There were many messages in the middle of the night, and you'd see, 10 to 20 messages coming in from the teacher, and my son wouldn't respond. And then he would eventually respond. And I think because this person was in a position of authority, he felt like he had to respond. And at that point, I printed off about 3 weeks worth of text messages. So it was probably, I don't know, maybe like a quarter inch of paper, and took it to the principal the next day and spoke with him. Now, I was also working at the school as a softball coach. So I knew the principal on a different level as well, not just as a parent. So when I went in there and met with him, I never had a problem before. I had never been in there to speak to anyone at the school about my son. And I just told him, I said, I think we have a problem. And I told him what was going on and what happened the night before. Gave him the paper with all the text messages on there. And this is just the phone numbers back and forth, just like your cell phone bill that you see. So there's no verbiage. And I said, I think we have a problem. He sat back in his chair, just exasperated. And you could see him thinking, he goes, I just gave him a teacher's award 2 weeks ago. And I mean, automatically you could tell that he also thought there was something wrong. And he said, I'll meet with each of them individually today, and I will get back to you this afternoon. And I went back in there that afternoon, and he said, they're both denying that there was any wrongdoing. And I said, so will you be reporting anything to DCFS as a mandatory reporter? And he said, no, because I have nothing to report. He said that you're Andrew's mom. You can file a DCFS report anytime you want. So that's the Department of Children and Family Services. And he must have told me probably 4 different times in that conversation in different ways, that I could file a report. And at that point, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I mean, this is somebody's life you're talking about. Is what you're thinking, really happening? And you don't want to ruin somebody's life over that. So I actually went to a local church, talked to the pastor, told him what was going on, and he said, this is out of your hands. You really need to file a report and let them handle it. So I waited at least 6 or 7 days and ended up calling the Department of Children and Family Services, filed the report. They're supposed to be out there within 24 hours. And 6 days after I filed the report, I still hadn't heard from anybody. So I contacted the local office, and they said that the person who had the file was on vacation, so it was sitting on their desk. So I said, so you guys don't do anything with the report then if someone's on vacation? And they said no. So I called the Illinois director of the Department of Children and Family Services. She actually picked up the phone. I told her what was going on. I could hear her tapping on the computer. And she said, you filed this 6 days ago. And I said, I understand. And she said, well, somebody should have been out there within 24 hours. She goes, if someone is not there today, I want you to get back to me. She goes, someone will be there today. And so about 10 minutes later, I got a call from the local office, and they said that they couldn't get someone out there that day. It was probably about 2:30 or so in the afternoon, and they could get someone out there the next morning at 8 o'clock. I said, that's fine. And I called her back, left a message, let her know what was going on. And about another 10 minutes later, I get a call from the school letting me know that DCFS was on the way. So she must have called them and said, you will get someone out there today. So by the time I actually got there, they already had my son in the office speaking to him. Now, it would have been better for me probably the next day because I could have at least contacted my son, let him know that they were coming. And I never thought that they would take him into a room without me being in there. But they did. And so he was meeting with the investigator as well as the counselor from the school was there. And he was walking out as I was walking in, and he was not happy with me. I always tease, I said, if looks could kill, I wouldn't be standing here right now. And when I walked in, the investigator said to me, I'm not so sure why this was so imperative for us to come out so quickly today. She said that this seems like just benign text messaging. And so I handed her the 3 weeks worth of messages, and I said, that's just 3 weeks worth. This has been going on since May. And I said, you might want to look at the times that are on there that those messages are coming in. And she said, oh. And I said, yeah. So this might not be the worst thing that you're dealing with, but this is the worst thing that I'm dealing with right now. So I'm sure you've seen much worse. I said, but I don't even know what we're dealing with at this point. I said, but I have a gut feeling that this is not good. And she goes, well, we can't really do anything about a mother's gut feeling. And I said, no, but it's your job to investigate it at this point. And I kind of shamed her for making me feel bad for calling her, raising my voice a little bit. And the counselor was, trying to get me to calm down. And I said, I don't need to calm down. I said, shame on you guys for talking to him without me being here. And so I left there, didn't hear anything back from them, didn't hear anything for a long time. And I was one of those moms that I would look at my son's phone. I would check it at least, 3-4 times a week, look at the text messages, look at his emails, look at his apps, see what he was doing. And again, because he was 15, 16 years old, and that was my phone. It's not his. I'm paying the phone bill. And I think, obviously because he knew that when these messages would come in, he would delete them. So I never saw one of over 6,000 messages. And at this point, I'm trying to figure out how to get the messages off the phone because it's a mini computer. Somehow those messages have to be in there. So after doing some research, I finally found a detective in Joliet, which is, I don't know, maybe about 20 miles from here, and called this detective, told him what was going on. He said, yes, I can get those messages off the phone. So I got a hold of our detective, and we have to do a whole chain of custody. So I have to get it to our detective, and then he can take it out to them. So I let my son have his phone throughout the weekend. And so this was probably about 3 weeks later or so. So we're probably about a month or so after I had originally overheard that conversation. And I told my son about 10 o'clock at night, I said, I need your phone. I said, because I found someone who can get those messages off the phone. And his face just went green. And he wouldn't even look at me. He goes, I said, is there something you need to tell me? And he said, I can't tell you. And he's like, I'll talk to the principal tomorrow and I'll talk to the detective. I said, okay. So the next morning we went there to the school and they were in the principal's office for about 3 hours. Principal comes out and he said, we're going to open up our own DCFS investigation. You were spot on with what you were thinking. And he said, Andrew wants to talk to you and tell you himself. We gave him some ways to do that. But if you have any other questions, I'll be here all day. So we go back home and Andrew then told me that he wanted to make a sex video with him and would refer to his body part as my little guy. Never really said anything about the money. So I go back and meet with the principal and he asked what he told me. And I told him and he said, well, he hasn't even told you the worst part. And that's when he told me that he had offered him money for oral sex up to $1,500.
Well, I have a
And
question.
sure.
Why, when you reported to the school and DCFS, didn't they turn it over to the police department too for investigation?
So because I had already gone to the police department, when I contacted DCFS, I had gone to the police department and already opened something up. Now the school had nothing to go on, so they wouldn't have opened up a case at that point. But now that there was an open case, the school just jumped onto that case. So I was meeting with the principal and he just said, I can think of a couple other kids that maybe that this has happened to because there was one kid that he had given a computer to, and there was another kid that he had been pretty close to, a few years earlier. So the stuff that he was texting my son, though, there was no way that he was the first. So at this point, I went home and they take the phone, and now that investigator had his phone for a couple months, and he couldn't get the messages off the phone. So iPhone, Apple had done an upgrade, and they weren't willing to help him get the messages off the phone. So that's the other thing is these phone carriers, these cell carriers, they do not have to help local jurisdictions with anything to get anything off of anybody's phone, even if it's your messages that you're requesting. And they said that, even with a subpoena, sometimes they're very slow to help and they drag their feet. So at this point, we didn't know what to do. And the detective then took the phone down to the Illinois State Police. They had his phone for about another 4 or 5 months. And they were having trouble, they said, getting the messages off the phone as well. And at this point, I had met a friend who her husband is a Secret Service agent. And she said, let me get you hooked up with one of his other friends with the Secret Service who's on a pedophile task force. Now, for those people who don't know, the Secret Service will help local jurisdictions with cases when they're not serving or protecting the president or other dignitaries. So I met with him and he said, Michelle, they just want you to go away. This is too much work for just one kid. And he said, so you need to stay in their face and tell them that you're an educated woman. You're not going anywhere. He said, I'm going to give you 2 business cards. You keep one for yourself and you take one down to the state's attorney's office and you tell them that you want those messages back within the next 7 days. And tell them that if they don't have them back in those 7 days, that you're going to turn them over to the feds and I'll have them off of there in 15 minutes. So that's what I did. And they then, lo and behold, had the messages back in 3 days. So my husband and I went to meet with 2 assistant state's attorneys at Grundy County Courthouse. We're in a huge conference room in the courthouse, and they're on one side, we're on the other of this huge table. And in front of them is a stack of papers about 1.5 inches thick. And there was an older assistant district attorney, and then there was also a younger one. And the older one looked at me and said, I don't think we have enough to go on. There's too many gaps in the transcripts. And I said, are those the messages in front of you? And they said, yes. I said, can I see them? And they both looked at each other like they weren't expecting that question. And I said, listen, I said, that's my property. And so is the phone. If you guys are doing nothing with that, I'm taking both of those things with me today. So they let me see the messages. And my husband was with me, who is my son's stepfather. And I'm flipping through the messages and tears are just dripping from my face. And everything that I told you about was in there. So while there were gaps in the transcripts, where he wanted to make a video where he offered him money, the $500, $1,000, and $1,500, and then he referred to his body part as my little guy. Am I ever going to get to see the little guy? This sort of thing. Plus, there were other things in there that I can't even remember at this point because it was not as bad as those 3 things. And I pushed the messages back very slowly. And up until this point, now we're almost a year after I overheard that first conversation. I've been pretty compliant and pretty even keeled and not really pitching too much of a fit. And I slammed my hands on the table and I started yelling and I said, you have got to be kidding me. I looked at the older guy and I said, you have grandkids that go to this school. And the younger guy, I said, you have kids that are going to be going to this school. You're okay with this guy teaching your children? And they looked at me like they were just beside themselves. They weren't even sure what to do. And then my husband started kicking me under the table, trying to get me to calm down. And I'm like, you kick me one more time, I'm kicking you out of this room. I was just irate and just beside myself. I don't remember yelling ever so loud in my life. And I always tease. I said, you see all these mama bear t-shirts or whatever. You have the mom and the little cub crawling behind, but that's not what you look like when you're fighting for your kids, which is why I came up with this logo. And that's what you look like when you're fighting for your kids. So it says I was a mama bear before it was cool.
Raw energy, and that's what bears and animals do. They protect their
Yep.
children.
Yep.
Now, I didn't want to really stop you what you're talking about, but how was your relationship with your child as he was growing up?
Oh my gosh, we were so close. I was a single mom for a long time and got remarried when he was 10. And we got divorced when he was 4, from my first husband. And so I took him everywhere with me. I mean, spoke to him like an adult, like he could carry on a full-blown conversation with an adult when he was, 8, 9 years old. And we were very close. Like I never thought for one second he would never tell me anything like this, but he was completely embarrassed. And he just wanted this to go away at this point. And he just turned 30 last year. Even at 30, he told me, had you not overheard that conversation, I would have never told you. And it's basically because he just wanted it to stop. And I think he thought once I knew that it would just stop and this would go away. But there was a point where I told him, he didn't really want to come forward. And we were standing in my kitchen and I looked at him. I said, Andrew, this is no longer about us and no longer about you. This is about the next kid. I said, if somebody before us would have come forward, we wouldn't be going through this now. And I sent him to bed and I said, there's 3 kids that live across the street, 4 that live down the street. If something happens to one of them and you could have stopped it, how do you say anything to their parents and how do you get through that? So he went to bed that night and, we had many talks too about suicide, that this wasn't worth doing anything to himself and if the teacher should commit suicide, that's not on him. So that night I was like up pretty much all night, kind of watching vigil over his room because I was afraid of what he might do. And, I had him in counseling at this point. We were going to counseling. So trying to do everything right from the beginning and trying to keep a good head on my shoulders. But when I met with these 2 assistant state's attorneys, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I just said to them, I said, what, one kid's not enough? And the older gentleman said, if there was just another child, somebody who could corroborate the story that, or something else that this happened to someone else. And I said, so what does he got to do? Sodomize my son before you're going to do anything? And at that point, I said I wanted to meet with the actual state's attorney, and they said that he was busy. So I called back the next morning at like 8:01 and told them who I was, and I said I really want to meet with the state's attorney. And they said, well, he's busy today. And I said, well, if he doesn't meet with me today, I said, I'm coming in, I'm picking up the telephone, and I'm also picking up all of the messages, and I'm taking it to the Illinois state's attorney, who was Lisa Madigan at the time. And she was actually talking about trafficking things at the time. So I thought maybe I'd get somewhere there. And so about 15 minutes later, I got a phone call from him himself, and he said that he would meet with me. So I went online and started printing off articles when he got appointed to that position. He wasn't voted in. The person who was in that position was actually moved into a judge position, and so he was appointed. And there was one article where he said that he came back to Grundy County to protect the children and families of Grundy County. So when I met with him that afternoon, he said that he wasn't familiar with my case. And I said, we're almost a year into this and you have no idea what's going on with my case. I said, that's a problem. I said, we're in the county seat. This is the same high school that you attended, but you have no idea what's going on with my case. I said, but I've heard that about you, that you really don't know what's going on with many of the cases that are going on here in the county. I said, I know that the police are waiting on 4 different subpoenas from other cases, and they've been waiting for months. And so he was not happy with me, and he was kind of arguing back with me. And I set the article down in front of him, and I said, how about we start doing this? You said you came back here to protect the children and families of Grundy County. Start doing your job. And so I left there, and then the next day I got a phone call from the detective, and he knew that I was meeting with him. He said, what did you say to him? So I told him. He said, well, we just got 4 subpoenas we've been waiting on. And I said, well, I'm so happy I could help you with your cases, but I'm still getting nowhere with mine. And still nothing was happening at this point. They didn't charge him with anything, even though they had those text messages in writing. And so months later, it was probably 3 or 4 months later, I get a phone call from the principal of Morris High School. And he said, I really need to meet with you. So I went down there, and he said, listen, I've been trying to get them to subpoena the personnel file because there are things in here that they're going to want to see. And I said, okay. So I go down to the state's attorney's office and give him that message. And he says, what could possibly be in there that we would need? I said, what skin is it off of your back? Just get it. And so he did a subpoena. And now here's the other thing is when at the very beginning, when all of this first happened and we couldn't get the messages off my son's phone, our detective had asked for a subpoena for the teacher's cell phone as well as his computer. And that got denied by the state's attorney. Now, all of this hinged on text messages and technology, but that got denied. So I'm not sure why. And I brought that up to the state's attorney when I met with him too. And he said, oh, well, I don't remember that. I said, of course you don't. I'm like, you don't know what's going on here. I was really like just so frazzled and just taken aback about how they just didn't want to fight for us. Like, I just don't understand any of that. But now, like, after researching some of the things that I have over the last few years, it also makes me wonder if somebody on the inside was involved or they were trying to protect this guy. I have no idea, but it just makes me wonder. So anyway, they get a subpoena, and the attorneys for the school didn't want to release the personnel file until I came and signed off on it because of the HIPAA law. So my son's a minor, and his name is all over this paperwork. So I went in, and the principal had met with the teacher, the union rep, and the superintendent, and the principal had been a counselor before. So he asked him straight up, did you ever offer Andrew money for oral sex? Did you want to make a sex video with him? And did you refer to his body part as my little guy? And he said he put his head down, shook his head in affirmation, and said yes. I'm like, we got him. So I go down to the state's attorney's office, right from the principal's office, and I told him what was in the personnel file. He said, well, why'd they let you see it? I said, because of the HIPAA law. He goes, they didn't have to do that. I said, honestly, I think they let me see it because they knew how much trouble I was having down here with you. And they knew that I would never see what was in there unless they let me see it. So now that I know what's in there, if you don't have this guy arrested in the next 7 days, I will have every major news station on your front lawn. So he waited the full 7 days, and then he indicted him. So the school had put him on paid administrative leave when it first came out what was in the messages, when my son fessed up what was in there. So that he'd been on paid administrative leave for almost a year. And now at this point we go status hearing after status hearing after status hearing. So it's their monthly status hearings. Nothing is really happening. And so it wasn't until 2012, we voted in a new state's attorney. So January of 2013, our detective went and met with him and said, hey, there's a case you need to work on. It's been hanging out there for 2 years and nothing has really been happening on it. So he met with me, my husband, and my son. So my son was 18 now at this time and was in his first year of college. So he met with us over his Christmas break. And he said, you know, I think we're going to have to take a plea deal. It's been so long. They're going to say that you can't remember exactly what happened. And there's so many gaps in the transcripts. And so at this point, this guy would not have to register as a sex offender. He'd still be able to teach and he would have to pay a fine. So pretty much a slap on the hand. So we go to court in August of 2013 and he's supposed to take a plea deal. And by the grace of God, that's the only way that I can actually describe this, is that he opted for a trial. And we were all floored. We couldn't believe it because this would have been the best deal he could have gotten. And the judge was so ticked at him and lit him up. He's like, we could have gone to trial this summer while this young man was home from school, because my son was going to college in New Jersey. And he turned 19 then in June of that year. And the judge lit up his attorney. He was so ticked, and he was saying things that I couldn't believe. Finally, somebody was saying some of these things to these two, and they were trying to pin everything on me, trying to make it look like I was just some vindictive mom going after this guy. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, like in all of these status hearings, right? So when this happens, we end up going in a few days later, meeting with the state's attorney and his first assist. And he said, you know, there's a new law that came into play in Illinois. So here in Illinois, our laws, they become law the year before and they become effective either January or July of the following year. So in July of 2013, there was a new law. It was a grooming law. And he said, everything that he did to you and your family and this community is in that law. So we're going to go after that, but there's no precedent set and there's no other grooming convictions in the United States. So it's going to be difficult to get. So we go to court in October of 2013. And the defense put me down as a witness, which kept me out of the courtroom, full knowing they would never call me because I would just hurt their case. And my son was on the stand for about 4 hours between the two sides. And then he had to come and sit with me in this room, you know, for 8 hours the following day after he testified. And I told our state's attorney, I said, make sure you tell his attorney thank you, because I just got 8 hours of uninterrupted time with my 19-year-old that I would have never have gotten, because there was no phone, no TV. We played cards and played games and talked. And so I said, please let him know that. And so he said he would. And anyway, we ended up getting the very first grooming conviction in the United States and also a conviction of solicitation of a minor.
Good. Well,
And
it
he ended
seems
up,
like
yep,
it seems like with all the stuff that was said in the text, and then they didn't really want to do anything, that, and I don't understand why they said it. They didn't have enough evidence. Well, with all that, they could have charged him with something else too on top of that, instead of waiting so long to get the process going. Now, would you want to divulge or go into what was in the teacher's record, or can you do that?
So it was that meeting. So it was essentially just those questions, like, did you offer him money for sex? Like, it was all of that. So it was pretty much a confession is what he had. And
Okay.
so that was really, between that and there was another kid that came forward to testify. Those two things were the linchpin, I think, in this whole thing. But you know, I just want people too to understand that even though he didn't touch my son, this affected him mentally. You know, when these guys are good at grooming, they pull on their heartstrings. And Andrew thought that he cost this guy his job. He thought he cost him his career. He was, when he went back to school, after, you know, that fall, he was just spiraling out of control. He was drinking. He was being belligerent. And that's not my son. Like, my son is so kind and just so smart. And I got a call from the dean of students at the school, and she told me what was going on. So I told her what happened. And she said, okay, we're going to get him in some counseling. So she helped facilitate that, got him into some counseling, and he started doing better, finished his second semester. And also leading up to this, so hindsight's always 2020, right? So my son, the summer before all of this, and before I heard that conversation, he was withdrawn, he was tired, He wasn't sleeping well. He didn't want to get up and go to school. None of those things were normal for him. And he was down the nurse's office several times with a resting heart rate of 120. So we thought he had something wrong with his heart. I took him to a cardiologist. Everything was fine. So all of these are signs of something is way wrong, way off. And so just for parents to know that if your child is acting completely different than what their norm is, that there's obviously something going on or there's something wrong.
Do you
Um,
think also when he was in high school, when all this was going on, he didn't really want to talk to you about it and go right at the teacher, that a lot of it could be because he was ashamed that would get out to the other students and then that would be ridicule or, looked at like, ha ha ha, which
yep.
is not right. But could that be part of the thing that was in high school?
Yes. And especially because he's a boy, right? So there's an organization, I think it's called 1in6.org. So 1 out of every 6 people or kids that are molested are boys, but they're the last ones that want to come forward. And so I think it's really important for people to understand that you should always listen and trust and listen to your kids and believe them if they tell you that something like this happens. Nobody wants to believe that this is going to happen to you or your kid. And this teacher, like I said, he was grooming not only him, but he was grooming me and the community. So the school thought he was great. He would volunteer for everything. He'd show up to all these you know, like all the school activities and help out. But that was his way of gaining trust with everybody. And I'm a physical therapist. I was in his house treating a family member for physical therapy, for home health physical therapy at the time he started texting my son, also coaching at the same high school where he was coaching. So he knew me on different levels as a parent, as a colleague, and as a healthcare provider. I think he thought that I would never ever think anything. And I mean, I immediately like, do not pass go, do not collect $200. As soon as I overheard that conversation, I knew something was off. So trust your gut feeling too, especially moms. If you think there's something wrong, there probably is. So don't ever try to talk yourself out of that. And also know now there's technology that you can use as parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. There is an app, it's called the Bark app, and they also make phones. So they make phones for kids. It's called the Bark phone. But you can actually set it up so that you will get all of your children's text messages going in and out on your phone, and you can set up for different keywords so you're not getting all of their silly text messages. So you can set it up for body parts, for cuss words, all of those sorts of things. You have control from your phone onto their phone. You can shut off their Wi-Fi. You can say which apps they can download. You can make it so that they only can communicate with you as a parent or with a grandparent, so they can't communicate with anybody else through their phone. It also has GPS on the phone that cannot be turned off. So they always have a tracking device on them, which is good and bad, right? So as they get older, of course, that's not something that you want to be doing. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody tracking me when I was, 17, 18 years old. But for kids who have a phone, because the times are so different now. Like these, 12-year-olds have a phone, 10-year-olds have a phone, but it's a way for them to stay in touch with their parents. So I think that's important. Also, the schools have gotten smarter. They have apps that they're using to text the kids, so they can only text the kids through those apps now, which is those are monitored by the school. So they can't actually text the kids individually, so unless they give their phone number, but that's how they will text different, the teams or any clubs that you're in. Hey, practice is switched or the club is switched to this classroom. They can do that through that app now, so they're not texting the kid directly.
And that's
So these are some things that have been put in place.
and the app is called BARK.
Yes, and I actually have a link to it on my website. So my website is just my name, michellepeterson.org. And there's a link on my website that you can go to the Bark app and look into that. It's fairly reasonable. I think it's $99 a year. And you can have several devices on there, and you have several kids' devices on there. So it's not very expensive and it's very user friendly. I actually have a cousin who lives in Montana, and she has a 13-year-old, and she bought the phone for her. And just last summer, the Bark app on my cousin's phone alerted her that her daughter was being messaged through Snapchat, and she thought it was a 14-year-old boy. She ends up taking the phone then to the local police department. They pretty much essentially told her she needed to be a better mother. And then she took it to the local sheriff, and she got the same message. So I said, take it to your local FBI. She had watched one of my podcasts and heard about the bark phone, and so that's what she did. The local FBI, though, had been trained and took the phone. And she'd just gotten out of school. I said, go to the school and get her Chromebook too, because this person's probably trying to get a hold of her on her Chromebook. And that's exactly what they found. And they end up tracing that number and the IP address back to a guy and his son in a different state. So it works. And out of that, I'll tell you later what came out of that, though. It's a phenomenal story. So what ended up happening then, 10 years later, I'm not really thinking about any of this until COVID. And then you start hearing about Jeffrey Epstein and you hear about all of these things going on, right? So everybody's spidey senses are heightened to grooming and trafficking and all of that going on. So I'm at an event in Nashville. It was a Reawaken event with General Flynn and Clay Clark, and met a trafficking investigator there whose name is Amy Coelho. She's out of Texas. And she started telling me about some cases she was working on. And she was working on the La Luz del Mundo case, which is a church cult. And they busted 23 different sex trafficking cells between Mexico and California. But it took them 10 years to actually get the leader of the church. And I think they only got him on child abuse charges. They couldn't get him on trafficking, even though that's what they were doing in the church, because the women in the church prepare the kids in the church for the men in the church. And she then told, and there's actually a documentary right now on Netflix about the La Luz del Mundo church. So you can actually look that up on Netflix. It's La Luz del Mundo. And she then told me about another case that she was working on, was a Larry Nassar gymnast, from Michigan State.
I remember him.
Yep. So I told her about what I said in my head, my measly little case here from Illinois. So I started telling her, and she said, hold on, are you from Illinois? And I said, yes. And she said, when was that? I said, 2013. He was sentenced in January of 2014. And she grabs my arm and got tears in her eyes. And she said, I cannot believe I'm meeting you. And I said, I need to get a picture with you and send it to my team. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, we use your case for every trafficking case we bust, including the ones I just told you about, because we have to prove the grooming in order to prove the trafficking. And you have the only grooming conviction in the United States. And we were both bawling. I was a mess. And we were both like, so in 10 years, we have the only grooming conviction? Like, that makes no sense. And so I told her the whole story. And she said, we watched your case in real time. We watched it go up to the appellate court. We watched it come back down. She said, we kept cheering for you. Like, come on, Mom, I keep going. Don't give up. She goes, because we watch other cases go through and they just give up. And she said, you did the one thing that most parents won't do. She goes, when you got told no, you kept going. You found another avenue. She said, most people don't do that. And she said, your tenacity and your son's willing to come forward. You guys have saved thousands of lives. And again, bawling. And I told her, I said, literally 5 days ago, I was laying in bed crying, just asking if anything I'm doing, asking God, is anything I'm doing making a difference? And literally 5 days later, he's like, here, let me show you how great I am. And he puts Amy in front of me. And I then asked her, I said, so if that's the case and you're using this for your trafficking case, she goes, no, you don't understand. She goes, everyone in the United States is using your case. She said, because there is no other grooming conviction. And she said, you have to understand, she goes, not knowing who you are, not knowing the story. We don't know your son's name because he was a minor at the time. It's just the initials. All we got was AK. And she said, we're waiting for that piece of paper in a file to come through that has the conviction so we can use that on our cases. And she said, everyone's using this. And I said, so if that's the case, could they have used this in the Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein trials? And she's also a paralegal. She goes, I don't know. I'd have to look at the case file. She goes, but I don't know what else they would have used. They would have nothing else to use. So just to even think that we would have some sort of a hand in the most prolific pedophile of our time is just overwhelming and very surreal. Because you never think, that when you're doing the right thing and you're pushing forward on something like this, you never think about those ramifications. You're thinking about just saving your kid and maybe the next kid.
But look what happened.
Right.
And
I never thought.
Small Morris, Illinois, to other states. So what you did, you marched through it and didn't put up with their BS saying, no, it's not big enough. This isn't, that big of a thing. But the thing is, God forbid if you didn't catch what was going on, that they could have had a face-to-face person-to-person encounter. And
Right.
this is happening. It's not only men that do that. There's women that does it to high school kids, which I've been watching sometimes Dr. Phil, and there's things on there about women. Now I don't know if they're doing the same thing by grooming them, or I don't know if you want to put input into that.
Oh yeah, I mean, the women are the ones who are usually actually going after the girls and getting their trust. So they're the ones who are going after them and trying to reel them in, just like Elaine Maxwell did, right? She went and some of these other girls, they were used to draw other girls in to what they were doing. So that's exactly what happens. And so it's not just men. The men are typically the pimps. The women are the ones who are the the ones who are soliciting them and trying to get them to do something and to
Well,
join their cult, so to speak.
right, because I've heard there's about a woman school teacher, but it was a male student. So that's another thing that people have to be aware of, is that you're going to have female teachers, and I've seen quite a few here in the last few years. You hear it in the news where it's a female teacher going towards a male student. I didn't hear much about, like you just said, male or female teachers going towards females. So that's a shocker there.
Yeah, it all happens. So, but and that's the thing. When I was at that reawaken, I had become acquainted with General Flynn and told him that day what happened. And so he introduced me to Mary Flynn O'Neill, and she is the CEO of America's Future. And General Flynn is the chairman of the board. So she then introduced me to Allie Hopper, who is a paralegal out of Florida. But backing up a little bit, Amy said, I think the reason that you have no grooming conviction is because people are taking plea deals. We need to change the law. She goes, I want to call it Andrew's Law after your son and make it so that somebody charged with grooming can't take a plea deal. And so she's like, would really like you to write the mission statement for the bill. Now, I have no idea how to write a mission statement. So I'm looking things up online, wrote a mission statement, and then she wrote the skeleton bill for Andrew's Law. So when I met with Allie, she went to look at the criminal code in Florida, and they had no grooming law in the books. And then we soon found out that Illinois was the only state that had a grooming law. So now we are trying to get a grooming law put in the books in Florida, but then now it's become my mission to get a grooming law put in place in all 50 states. So working with Allie and her reps and senators from Florida, I went down and did a presentation, met with one of the reps who was the sponsor of the bill, and it was Representative Bankston, and told him our whole story. And he was in hook, line, and sinker. He was going to make this happen. And so Florida does have a grooming law put in place. It was signed by Governor DeSantis last April.
Good.
And we then met with another representative from Iowa, Mark Thompson, who was introduced to me by Emily Peterson, no relation, but she was the mama bear from Iowa who was really pushing to get the masks off the kids in schools in Iowa and help change the law there that they can't mask these kids. And so she introduced me to Mark and told him my story, told him what we were working on. Allie also helped Mark with their grooming law and with their grooming bill, and that became law in Iowa last year as well. I think it was May of last year. It became law in Iowa. And then Arizona had something happen in their state. They got a hold of Florida, took the Florida law, took the Illinois law, took the Iowa law, and now they also have a grooming law in Arizona. And there's also a grooming law in Georgia, and that was put through by another mom named Susan Cobb. And Susan's daughter had been groomed and subsequently molested by a gymnastics coach in Georgia from the YMCA. And so she'd been working for the last 3 years trying to get that passed, and it finally passed last year. And unfortunately, her daughter took her life. So after she came forward, nobody wanted to believe her that that's how this all went down, that she was, groomed and then abused. And she comes out and tells her whole story, and they're not wanting to believe her, not wanting to do anything to this guy. So keep them in your prayers because that's all still going through the court system right now as well.
Well, they have to, and like you said, you referred to it earlier. It doesn't only affect the child; it affects the parents.
Everybody. I
And
mean,
it's a long time thing.
it's horrible. I mean, it was the whole time we were going through that for the 3 years. I mean, you're still trying to muddle through your day, and all the while this is going on in the background, and you're trying to act like everything's okay, and it's not okay. Like our house it was tumultuous here. Like, we couldn't understand why things went down the way they did. My husband was wondering why he was answering the text messages, and it's not the kid's fault ever. The kid is the victim in this whole thing. And so that's the thing too, is parents, you just need to fight for your kids and back them up. Amy gave me a statistic that 79% of the kids whose parents fight for them in a situation like this will end up becoming productive members of society. So just to let you know, when he got convicted, he ended up getting sentenced to 180 days in jail, only had to serve the first 60 unless he violated parole. If he violated parole, then he would have to serve the other 120 days. And he had to register as a sex offender for only 10 years, so it's not lifelong. So he came off the sex offender registry last May, and he had to pay like a $2,700 fine, but he can no longer teach again. So that's the biggest thing, is he can't teach. And so when I was working with Amy on this and trying to do this grooming law amendment, I got a hold of my state rep, Jed Davis, here in the Grundy area. And Jed then sponsored the grooming bill last year. And so Andrew's law then would have been anybody charged with grooming and or trafficking cannot take a plea deal. We wanted to change it so that the sex offender registry would be lifelong for somebody who is convicted of grooming, and wanted to also make it so that the sex offender registry would include places of business that are privately owned. So I ended up seeing this teacher working at the mall in Joliet, and he was working at a uniform shop. I went in to go buy a new lab coat and saw him working the register, and my heart started racing, and there's like this whole PTSD thing going on. I circled around and I was watching him, and he was leaning over the counter looking into the mall, but there was one of those little children's play areas right there. So he was not even like 60 feet from this children's play area. I'm like, how can that be if he's on the sex offender registry? And I talked to a detective, and he said, well, those places of businesses are privately owned. They're not included on the sex offender registry. So we have to think, this law was written back in the 70s. Those places didn't exist. You didn't have a Chuck E. Cheese. You didn't have Dave and Buster's. You didn't have these privately owned these play areas in the mall. So that is going to be part of this amendment too, is places that are privately owned that cater all or in part to children would be on the sex offender registry, so they can't frequent those places. So we put it through, or Jed put it through last year, and it sat on the committee chair's desk and was never called for vote. And that was Justin Slaughter out of the 27th district. And so now this year, it's been put through again, and I was just looking it up today. So the bill number is different. I think it's Bill 1140 and has a different sponsor, but it has not been called for vote yet and still sitting on their desk. So we really need to work at getting that bill called for vote as well. And I'm actually going down to Springfield next week and hoping to meet with some of the folks down there and try to get that bill called for vote. So that's
Good.
what I've been working on, and working with all these other states. So I've been working with a senator out of Indiana, and he has put that in as a bill in Indiana. There is another bill in Wisconsin, and I think Missouri as well. And then when that happened to my cousin, I told her, I said, in Montana, you need to find a representative or a senator that'll sponsor the grooming bill in Montana. So her boyfriend actually has a cousin who is a state rep in Montana, and she's a Democrat state rep, new mom. And so she told her what happened to her daughter, then told her about what I was trying to do and sent her to my website. And so she put the bill through. It wasn't part of what she works on, so she gave it to another representative, and they put the bill through. It actually was voted on this week. It passed the House 100-0, passed the Senate today 50-0. So now that's going to go on to be signed into law. So because of the
Great.
Bark app, and because of her listening to my podcasts and then taking action in her state, this is now becoming law. But I want to read to you what this bill is, because this is the harshest penalties I've heard yet for any grooming bill. So let me go through here real quick. And this is, if anybody wants to look it up, it's Montana House Bill 84, I believe. 82, House Bill 82 in Montana. And it was introduced by Katie Love, who is her boyfriend's cousin. And it's actually been sponsored, though, by a different representative. And let me go through here real quick. Sorry, it's 16 pages long. because they put it into another law. So they just amended a law that they had. So it says in here, let's see, if someone, if the offender believes to be a child 16 years of age in order to engage in sexual conduct, actual or simulated, or knowingly coerces, entices, persuades, arranges for, or facilitates a child under 16 years of age, or a person, including a law enforcement officer, using an undercover fictional identity or fictitious identity, whom the offender believes to be a child under 16 years of age, to travel within, from, or to the state with the intention of engaging in sexual contact, actual or simulated, knowingly threatens to release, exhibit, or distribute any image or video of a child engaging in sexual conduct, act, or simulated. So, or coerce a child to do that. It'll be should be punished by life imprisonment or imprisonment in the state prison for a term not to exceed 100 years and may be fined not more than $10,000. If the victim is under 16 years of age or is a person, including a law enforcement officer, so goes through that, someone who is actually having a fictitious identity, a person convicted of the offense of sexual abuse of children shall be punished by life imprisonment or imprisoned in a state prison for a term of not less than 4 years or more than 100 years, may be fined more than $10,000. And then here, a person convicted of the offense of sexual abuse of children for the possession of material as provided in the previous subsection shall be fined not to exceed $10,000 or imprisoned in the state for a term not to exceed 10 years. Now, if the victim is 12 years of age or younger, and the offender is 18 years of age or older at the time of the offense, the offender will be punished by imprisonment in a state prison for a term of 100 years, and there is no chance of parole for the first 25 years. And if they get out after that 25 years, the offender will be ordered to enroll in and successfully complete the educational phase and the cognitive and behavioral phase of a sexual offender treatment program provided or approved by the Department of Corrections. If the offender is released after the mandatory minimum, so of 25 years, the offender is subject to supervision by the Department of Corrections for the remainder of the offender's life and shall participate in the program for continuous satellite-based monitoring.
Wow,
So,
that's good, steep terms. So,
right.
I mean, people beware. And the thing is, the counseling's good, but maybe they should get counseling when they're in prison too.
Right.
You know? So,
and that's the thing too, is I talked to the state rep in Indiana. They have a super majority right now. This should not be a partisan issue, but it seems to be a partisan issue for whatever reason.
I know well.
Yeah.
I think I know why. We can touch on that because we're going to take a short, about 2-minute commercial break. If you need to get you a drink or whatever, go ahead. And I'm going to play this commercial. It's different than the one you saw. Well, it's different. So go ahead, and if you need to take use restroom or whatever, it's about 2 minutes and 13 seconds. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Yes.
This video opens with fun-loving celebrity chef Guy Fieri on board a Carnival cruise ship.
I'm Guy Fieri, and we're on Carnival. I brought the entire family, and we're having a blast.
A montage shows Guy's large and lively family posing for a family photo, riding Carnival's sky ride, and speeding down water slides. At Guy's Burger Joint, Guy serves up and samples thick, juicy hamburgers.
Have you guys had these burgers?
A crowd gathers at Guy's Burger Joint. Ground beef patties sizzle on a grill.
Look at that, big slab of cheddar.
Smiling, Guy pats down a man's head with a small cloth towel. Now, guests feast on the piggy patty, a beef burger with cheese, lettuce, tomato, and a second patty made of bacon.
Ryder!
Guy and his family play dodgeball at Sky Court, Carnival's multi-purpose outdoor court.
Ellis, you're out! Oh!
Now, Guy tours his newest Carnival restaurant. A sign reads, Guy's Pig and Anchor Barbecue Smokehouse. Our smoke is no joke.
This is the newest concept that we've done called Pig and Anchor. We have blue ribbon chicken, we have real deal brisket, we have beans, we have mac and cheese, pulled pork, you name it. Pitmaster.
Thank you, sir.
Guy fist bumps one of the restaurant staff.
Nicely done. Beautiful.
Guy points to a brisket with a crisp, dark brown bark.
Look at that bark on there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good dudes.
At Carnival Waterworks, a little boy speeds through an enclosed water slide featuring colorful lighting effects.
Bang for the buck, you can't beat a Carnival cruise. You get to see 3 different beaches on one vacation.
A montage shows a pristine beach surrounded by tropical trees and children snorkeling in a turquoise sea.
I'm not the pitch guy. I just do the restaurants. But dollar for dollar, pound for pound, you can't find a vacation like it.
Guy watches family members playing basketball. A young boy shoots a hoop from a distance.
This is exactly what this is all supposed to be.
A logo appears, the red Carnival funnel. Text, Carnival, choose fun. Copyright 2018 Carnival Corporation, all rights reserved. Carnival, choose fun, and the Carnival logo are registered trademarks of the Carnival Corporation.
Well, I'm back and with Michelle, and she's a parent of a child that was being groomed by a school teacher. And we left off, and I'm going to we're going to go on to some of the other things besides just the grooming and what's going on. Like you said, the elites, and go ahead and then open it up like a can of worms.
So I think we left off with the Indiana senator, and he put through his bill, and the first offense would just be a misdemeanor. So I told him, I said, you have a supermajority in Indiana. You should really be throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this. And I gave him the Montana bill, and he's like, wow. He's like, I don't know if they would go for this. And I said, well, just try to put something through that's a little bit more harsh. So I think if it ever gets called to committee and gets called, for vote, then they'll look at amending it from there. But he just really wants to get it called at this point. So there's just so many things. The Epstein client list was supposed to be released today, right? And I don't know if you saw any of that, but it's very heavily redacted. They just essentially gave what they've already given us, the black book, essentially, and
with the names
and who's on there. But we had that a few years ago already. So what they're actually doing is calling out the Southern District of New York because they have heavily redacted everything and didn't give them everything that they wanted. They wanted the videos, they wanted everything that the FBI got. So there was a whistleblower apparently that came out yesterday and told the FBI, told Kash Patella what was going on, and that they are holding back on everything. So things are going to get a little bumpy here, I think, for the Southern District of New York. And so that should hopefully be coming out within the next few days, I would think, if they can, really put some pressure on them. But there are people who don't want this stuff to come out. These people who are on these lists, they're very high profile people, in the government and in Hollywood. So of course they don't want that to come out. And they're people with a lot of money. So they're probably paying people off to hold that stuff back. And again, you look at the movie The Sound of Freedom that came out a couple years ago, and that was actually set to come out 5 years prior to the time that it did, but people were not letting it come out, and they had to find, I think it was Angel Studios that finally put it out. So they had to go to more of an off-brand studio to get that movie out to the masses. And I think one of the things where there was a shortfall in that movie is they showed, trafficking happening in a different country. And people need to understand that we have the highest number of people looking for child pornography and buying children here in the United States. So this is very pervasive here. And they're not just trafficking these kids for sex, they're trafficking them for their organs, and they're trafficking them for labor.
See, that's what I was going to ask you. Why do you think they want to buy kids? I mean, and I think you just answered the question that was in my head. And
Right.
It's very sad. I mean, child labor. I mean, why do we have to have child labor in the United States? Or are they taking these kids that's being abducted or whatever they are and shipping them overseas? Or what do you think's going on?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, they're shipping these kids overseas. There's actually trafficking going the other direction. So they're taking US children and taking them across the southern border because we typically are have healthier kids here. They're not coming from a third world country, so their organs are worth more money because they're healthier. So people don't think about that they're trafficking in the opposite direction, more for organ harvesting. So people
Well,
need to understand really what's going on, and it sounds like so deep and so dark, and people don't want to really believe that this is happening. That southern border being open over the last 4 years, and we have an influx of 300 to 500,000 children that they have no idea where these kids are. This is government sponsored, taxpayer funded trafficking, child trafficking going on. Tara Lee Rodas came out as a whistleblower, and she was basically stating that they were sending kids to a home where they had already sent children. So one home had like 20 some kids going to it. And so she started keeping track. There were other whistleblowers that were keeping track of what was going on. So she came out as a whistleblower and she's testified in congressional hearings. So this is actually happening, and it's pervasive, it's happening everywhere.
so they're
And
saying that the Border Patrol somehow missed all these kids going to these same addresses?
right.
Have a database on there when they took these kids in and, hey, we have this child here going this address, we have this child here going this address, and they didn't have that type of database set up?
Right, and if you listen to her congressional hearing, she said that she tried to tell, her one up, "Hey, we've already sent some kids here," and they pretty much told her to be quiet. So they know it's happening. It's, like I said, being funded by the government. You have Catholic Charities involved, um, Lutheran, I think it was like Lutheran Ministries, they're involved. So they're all involved in this, and it's all about money. And I just don't understand, like, how do you do this to children or to these families? And that's the other thing too, is all of this starts with grooming. You go back to home country where these kids are coming from. Somebody's grooming those families and paying them off and saying, "Hey, we'll take your kid across the border and we'll give them a better life in the United States." So they've groomed that family. They take that child, and all along the way, this child is being raped. And when they get here, they say that they have to pay off, them bringing them up here. So it's either through labor or through sex that they're having to pay off their debt. And you think about all of these kids that have been brought over, many of them were very young. So let's say you had a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old that came across the border
Yeah, I've seen
4
the
years ago,
pictures of a
5 years
2-year-old.
ago. Nobody's gonna know where that child goes back to. How do we know where that child goes back to? So these are the things that people here in the United States need to think about. We're going to have a ton of children that are going to need homes. Churches are going to have to step up and maybe take some of these kids in. It's that's something else that America's future is looking at, is like, how do we rehome some of these kids? Again, you're not going to be able to find out where they came from and get them back to home country, get them back to their families or their parents. So we're going to have a ton of children we're going to have to take care of.
Well,
So
I don't
that's
understand.
something else we need to think about.
It burns me when you say the Catholic charities and stuff like that being involved. If you're a religion based in faith in God, why is the churches involved with that? You probably know more about that than I do.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, isn't it? But I mean, if you go on to America's Future, onto their website, they talk about all of this. And Mary Flynn O'Neill has talked about Catholic charities and kind of calling them out with what's happening. But you know, you heard about over all these years, all these priests that were molesting kids and those types of things that were happening, and you don't ever really hear about what happens to the. So a lot of them were being moved around, moved to other churches, and so they kind of get lost in the shuffle. So again, who's involved at the highest levels? Um, the Diddy list and the Epstein client list, like, these people are highly involved. I mean, even here in Illinois, you have the Pritzker family is very involved with the World
Really?
Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum, they are pushing down what's called minor attracted people or age gap love, and they're trying to make it so that having sex with a child is normal. They want to normalize that, and they want to make it so that it's okay to do that. Um, And so if you have these folks who are involved with the World Economic Forum and that's what their platform is, you have to ask yourself then at that point, right? So Tom Pritzker, who is JB Pritzker's cousin, he's the CEO of Hyatt Hotels. He's in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book
Yeah, I
on
saw
page
that. And I was
45.
wondering, if that was a relative of,
Yep, it's his cousin. So he's on page
wow.
45 under 13 different phone numbers. So you tell me if they're involved, right? And then you also have this whole transgender push and grooming our kids in the schools for all of that and really pushing the LGBTQ stuff on these kids. I mean, and you know, the national sex education standards, they're trying to normalize sex so that when you, and that's grooming, like in these schools, they're trying to make it sound like, you know, this is all okay. I mean, they were having conversations about kindergartens being able to tell you what all the genders are, right? There's two genders, but they wanted them to explain what all of these other genders are, binary, non-binary, all of that. In kindergarten, I think, and by second grade, they were wanting them to know what masturbation was. I mean, no 7-year-old needs to understand that or know that. That's grooming. So if you normalize sex, they're not going to think there's anything wrong with it when somebody starts molesting them. So that's where I draw the line, right? And then you have his other cousin, James Pritzker, who now goes by Jennifer Pritzker and is a retired, I think, colonel from the National Guard. And they have given the most money to Lurie's Children's Hospital for transgender surgeries. And his other cousin, Penny Pritzker, was in the Obama administration, and she had done a speech back in 2016 with the World Economic Forum talking about, you know, public-private partnerships and partnerships with these NGOs. Like, these are unelected oligarchs who are trying to change our laws. And the UN is also in cahoots with them. So the UN, the World Economic Forum, and it's maddening when you look at it all. And it's being pushed down by the highest levels and people that are involved with that. And then they have this young global leaders, you know, and Fidel Castro was part of that. And, you know, many people that are in these higher positions in other countries all went through the young global leader stuff with the World Economic Forum, and they're in cahoots with Bill Gates. And why is Bill Gates trying to help make or change any laws? Like, he was really doing a lot of stuff during COVID, and he owns the most farmland in Illinois. I don't know if people know that, but
No,
why does
well,
Bill Gates own farmland?
you just told me a bunch about Illinois. I didn't know, especially with the Pritzkers and they're being involved with it. And now you're saying Gates owns most of a majority of the land in Illinois.
Yes.
And then you're seeing what the Democrats were trying to push with, hey, if you want to be a girl, or if you're a girl, you want to be a boy, with a guy, whatever, or vice versa, you know, it's okay. And then you see Governor Pritzker in the state of Illinois backing up abortions, you know, and when you just, my head just spun when you said about Pritzker in the state of Illinois. I mean, it's like, people need to know this, and
Right.
this is going to be a good clip of that part right there, because I was shocked. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll let you go on about the high elites and how far it goes, and
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at, you know, you look at the stuff that Doge is doing. So they're finding money in the Pentagon, right? And that the Pentagon and the CIA, they've been funding a bunch of things over in Hollywood. So they're pushing the propaganda in Hollywood, and they're pushing all of this stuff as well. So, you know, you sound crazy until you're not, right? And you heard about like this whole depopulation event, we know, with during COVID and the vaccines. And when you look at everything individually, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. You mentioned abortion. So we have this abortion issue going on. And so you have millions of babies being killed. And then you have COVID and the vaccines, and some of these vaccines, if you go on to VAERS and you go into openvaers.com. So openvaers.com, it'll tell you how many people we have reported dead from this vaccine alone. And it's more than any other vaccine and all vaccines combined. It should be pulled from the market. And then you have, you know, the whole transgender push. So they're removing sex organs. So these people can't procreate. Now these kids will never be able to procreate and have children. So now you put them all together, though. So now you have depopulation in all of those events. I think we have less than 1 child per family in the United States. How do you keep going? The death rate is far exceeding the birth rate. So how do you keep going with the population? And when you say that they're trying to depopulate us, people look at you like you're crazy. And the Georgia Guidestones stated right on there that they wanted to depopulate us to 500 million people. So how does that work? And why would you want to do that? But if they have fewer people to take care of, they have more money in their pocket. Plus, we're easier to control if there's fewer people. And I think I heard something not too long ago. All the people in the world, you could fit them all in the state of Texas, in the state of Alaska. Like, there's plenty of land for everybody. God wouldn't have given this world and told us to go forth and procreate and fill the world if he didn't think that the world could handle it, right?
Exactly.
So people just need to understand what's happening and really open their eyes to all of this. I mean, it's really, like I said, you sound like you're crazy until you're not.
Well, it's like
So
Dan Bongino, many times they called him a conspiracy theorist. But you guess what? I would say probably 99% of what he was talking about has come to reality.
right. I mean, you even look back, Kennedy told us in one of his speeches, I think it was in early 1962, like right before he was killed. And he said that we were going to be infiltrated and not invaded, and that there was a monolithic society, a secret society. And you start looking into some of these secret societies, and you look into, the Jesuits, and then you look into the Black nobility, and you look into, all of these different entities, the Knights Templar and the Freemasons, at the highest levels, that's where things are happening, and they're doing child, ritual abuse. And, many of these people who have been sold into the MK Ultra program, such as Kathy O'Brien, they would impregnate her and she would deliver the baby and they would sacrifice it right in front of her. And people don't think this is happening. And Kathy O'Brien's story is unbelievable. If people want to go and look her up, it's Kathy with a C. But she has a book out there called Transformation of America, and she lays everything out there. What happened to her? She was actually sold by her father into the MK Ultra program as part of a deal because he got caught sending child pornography in the United States mail. And so he cut a deal, and the person he cut the deal with and the person that she was sold to into the MK Ultra program was a senator from Michigan. It was Gerald Ford,
Whoa.
who was a
Okay.
33rd degree Mason.
Wow.
And she has this in her book. She's never been sued for defamation. She actually testified in a congressional hearing, I think it was in 1988, but they said that they couldn't go after any of the people that she testified against because it would give up too many government protected secrets. Right.
It's just sad. I mean, you have blown my mind a couple times today. Wow. And so
Yeah.
you think this also goes maybe to the Vatican and stuff like that they're aware of it, or what?
I'm sure they're aware of it. Could be involved. I don't know for sure. But they're definitely aware of it. And even Lynn Wood, who is a defamation attorney, he was the attorney during the Atlanta Olympics. Remember when they had the bomb go off? So he proved that it was the FBI that set the bomb off and not his defendant. And he came out with Sidney Powell after the 2020 election. They were trying to prove election fraud, and he posted on Twitter in late November of 2020, and he pretty much laid out there how they do this. And so what he put on Twitter was that they will take a child and they will get the rep or the senator or some dignitary drunk or drug them, take them to a hotel room, force them to have sex with that child, and sometimes make them even kill that child, get it all on video, and then they blackmail them. So that's how they control them.
Whoa.
Now, this is a defamation attorney, the most probably well-known defamation attorney in the United States, and he put this on Twitter. So he's got to have the receipts for this for him to say that, right? And the people are like, well, isn't anybody looking for these kids? But let me lay something out for you. So let's say that they take a 12-year-old kid a 12-year-old girl, and they impregnate her as many times as they can until she's 30. Nobody's looking for those children. None of those kids have a birth certificate.
Wow.
This is how deep this goes.
Wow. Whoa, whoa. I mean, and how can this not get out? I mean, yeah, I can understand you said they take this politician, drug him, and then do that. But how is it kept so secretive? And were these, I mean, you have, like you said, they impregnate this girl over and over and over again. I mean, where do you think this stuff happens at? I mean,
It happened
where,
anywhere, right? It could happen in somebody's home. Like they may not, neighbors will never maybe even know. I mean, many people in this day and age don't even know who their neighbors are, right? They don't even know who the person is across the street. So this stuff is happening in neighborhoods. There's rumor that there's tunnels all over the world and that this happens in these tunnels. Um, and you can actually look that up. There are tunnels that are all over the place. So it just makes you wonder, like, where is this stuff happening, right? But it's happening.
and then the only way to get it stopped is getting it
Expose
out
it.
there. Exactly. And,
Dark to
and
light, right?
well, yeah, because and I heard a saying a long time ago. I don't know where I heard it from. That the Great Babylon will fall from within. Have you heard that one?
I have heard that.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder if we were close to that happening within the last 4 years.
Sure. Of course we were, and you look at you look at back at the top 3 positions in our government since 1980 until President Trump's last administration. The top 3 were held by either a Bush, a Clinton, or an Obama
Yep.
since 1980.
And go ahead and just tweak it one more thing and say what is the correlation between those three?
So the Bushes, I mean, even Kathy O'Brien called out the Bushes, and she talked about Bush Senior, and she talked about Cheney, and that they have, raped her and her daughter, and um, so you really need to go look up Kathy O'Brien. This is the stuff she's talked about, and she's been phenomenal in this fight and trying to expose what's going on. Um, you have Bush Jr. She said that, they have these human hunting parties and he was in one of these hunting parties with her. So it's just like you don't think that this stuff is happening. And then when she actually puts it all out there in her book and she talked about it in congressional hearing, like at what point do you start to believe these people, if they're actually exposing it?
Well, they're going
So
to try
people,
to debunk you every way they can without actually taking your life and getting you out completely,
right. So I
which
know
has
there's a lot of
happened.
whistleblowers out there, and people just need to go and do some research and look it up for themselves. Don't take my word for it. Go and look this stuff up, and um but Kathy is healed. She's a phenomenal person. She's in this fight, and that it's just about exposing all of this stuff and really getting people to understand what's going on. And then when God puts something in front of you, that you actually answer that call and you do what's being asked of you, and you ask for protection and you ask for that hedge of protection, and
Yes.
that's just you just have to do it and not be afraid. Fear is how they do everything, right? They want to control you through fear. And that's what's happened, that happened during COVID. We saw it all. It was all fear based, which I call fear porn. And they're trying to get you to do things that you wouldn't normally do because it's all based on fear.
Yeah.
So people just
Well,
need to stand firm in God and stand firm in the word, and just know that God wants his people saved. He wants his children saved.
well, exactly. Yeah. And I want to touch on three more things before we end this. One, P. Diddy. Uh, again, Pizzagate. Okay. And then do you think there's still things happening on Epstein's Island?
Epstein Island, no. I think that's all been taken care of. Um, P. Diddy is Pizzagate. So
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Pizza.
Whoa. Rewind. Rewind. I thought Clintons were Pizzagate. So
All of that's Pizzagate. This is what they do, right? So even when you look at Epstein Island, so Ghislaine Maxwell, her dad was Israeli Mossad. And so I think that whole island was a honeypot to control politicians, control other elites, and they would get them videoed and they would blackmail them. This is just what they do, and that's how they control them. So you have Ghislaine Maxwell was, again, she's the one going out and getting these girls to bring them back to the island. And then you have the politicians that are brought there with Epstein. So the whole thing was it was all done on purpose to control these people. And that's the same thing that's happening with P. Diddy. Like he was controlling people at the parties and getting their stuff on video and then blackmailing them, and then you look at the WikiLeaks emails that were dropped back in 2016, and then Liz Crokin started looking into the emails, and she was talking about Comet Ping Pong, which is a pizza place in DC where they were doing some of this stuff in the basement. And she's got all of this on her X page, and you can go back and look at the movie Out of Shadows, which was put out by Mike Smith, who is a stuntman from Hollywood, and he was exposing what was going on. It's all the same story, which is why I say it is Pizzagate. This is what they're doing to these kids. They're bringing them in and they're selling their souls to the devil essentially, and they have to do certain things in order to get their status. And that's what the whole P. Diddy thing is going to expose.
Now, do you think any of these elites that's been on the list, supposedly the visitation list, are they ever going to get charged, or are they just going to sweep that underneath the rug? And if they do, what would they charge them with? And then I'll let you mention that when we get my train of thought.
Yeah, I do think they will be charged. I mean, President Trump has done everything he said he was going to do, right? So everything he said, he's done. Everything he campaigned on, he's done. So I don't think this will be any different. And this is going to be a huge, deep, dark web that's going to come out. And it's not just here in the United States, it's global, it's happening everywhere. So people need to kind of wrap their heads around that too, that this is not just here. There's going to be many people on those lists are going to be probably the same people. And there's probably going to be many people on that list that you're going to be surprised about. So people just need to be ready, for what's coming. And I think they will be charged with not only grooming, but also trafficking, child abuse, child molestation. Those are the charges that are going to come out. Crimes against humanity.
Right. Now, I don't know if you heard this, but I heard it, and maybe you can verify it. P. Diddy had a home somewhere on the East Coast, somewhere around where shipping containers were, or shipping was going in and out. And there's other, I guess, big elite stars around there. Have you heard that or anything?
I heard that as well. I don't know if there's any confirmation of that, but I did hear that too. Yeah, I don't know for sure. But I've probably seen some of the same stuff you have, and you just go out and research this stuff.
Right. And then stuff like that, that's hard to research because I think they have it under lock and key. But
Right.
All right. Is there anything else you want to throw out there?
Yes. So I just wanted to talk about too, some of these folks are offshoring their money right now, and people think it's because of Doge, and people who are making a $200,000 salary are multimillionaires and they're offshoring their money. But I think there's two reasons they're offshoring their money. And there are executive orders that were written under the last administration. So it's Executive Order 13818 and Executive Order 13848. So Executive Order 13848 actually seizes the assets of those who are convicted of colluding with foreign powers to interfere with our elections. And 148 is seizing the assets of those who are charged and convicted of grooming of trafficking. So if they've been trafficking people or children and they're convicted, their assets are seized, and those assets are then used to help the victims. So these are orders that were signed into law underneath President Trump. He's the only president to sign 9 bills into law against human and child trafficking. 3 of those bills were actually Democrat sponsored. So none of this should be a partisan issue. If you're really wanting to save kids and save people from being groomed and trafficked, this is nonpartisan. We all have children. We should want these kids saved. So that's my final
Exactly.
pitch. And anybody who's watching this in another state, if you have a rep or a senator that you know personally that would sponsor a grooming bill, please have them contact me through my contact page on my website. The email goes directly to me, so you can reach out to me and see if you have somebody that you can contact. But you really need to have somebody you have a personal connection with, somebody you can text or that you can make a phone call to and really tell them about this story. Because when you send an email out to somebody in the government, it just kind of goes off in the ether and you have no idea what's happening with that. So I'm really hoping that, this will garner, somebody to sponsor a grooming bill in a different state.
Great. Well, Michelle, it was great. I mean, you had my head spinning a couple times, and especially about Illinois. It's like, whoa. Yeah, I
Yeah.
said, I saw the Pritzker name on the list of Epstein's, but I didn't. I thought, well, is it actually related to our governor? And you just
Yeah.
you nailed it on the head. Well, thank you, and we'll get the word out there. And I'm going to make it one final pitch from my side. I thank you all for watching the Republican Town Hall Meeting channel on Channel 12 TV Network. If you can and you're listening, and subscribe, $9.99 a month, canceled anytime, and it gives you access to all 12 channels that we currently have on Channel 12 TV Network. And for right now, we're going to go put you in the back room. I'm going to do the closing, and I'll meet you in the back room.
Thanks, Leon, for having me.
Thank you a lot, Michelle.
Trump is a man, God is on his side. Heal our world, Lord, with Trump by your side. Your angels protected him, your hand moved his face. Without you, Lord, our world lost in space. Fight, 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 Trump is our life. Stand up, America, and help in this fight. Now guide us, Lord, and clean her face. The world needs Trump to make it a better place. Stand tall, America, with hope in your heart. Together we're strong, we'll never fall apart. Fight, 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 Trump is our life. Stand up, America, and help in this fight. Now guide us, Lord, and clean her face. The world needs Trump to make it a better place. Stand tall, America, with hope in your heart. Together we're strong, we'll never fall apart. Fight, 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 Trump is our life. Stand up, America, and help in this fight.
I can't hear you. I think you're muted. Nope.